Hello everyone, good evening. You'll see this video in the morning since I'll publish it then. A few minutes ago, President Donald Trump officially announced that he is lifting some of the sanctions from the Russian Federation on their oil sector in order to prevent a collapse in Europe so that Europe can once again purchase oil from Russia in the volumes that it actually needs. This is a very difficult moment, I think, for Ukraine, and I think that now it is becoming clear why things are the way they are. 2 weeks ago, Trump spoke to Zelensky and made statements in his speeches. He said that Ukraine should accept the conditions that exist today because it will only get worse in the future. Yes, meaning the current conditions, that is, to give up Donbas and establish some kind of truce, then get some security guarantees and so on. And now it's clear why he was saying that. Because now, if Europe starts massively buying oil from Russia again, especially with the Hormuz Strait being blocked, if they decide to, they will buy it at the prices that currently exist in the world for Russian oil, and those prices can only go up. This, in fact, will simply give Russia even more money reserves. To wage this war for decades more, let's be honest, they could have continued it for many years anyway, but this would allow them to wage it for decades. And overall, the situation is developing now where, in fact, Ukraine doesn't even have the possibility not just to achieve the 1991 borders or even the 2022 borders to finish this. And probably if things keep going the way they are now, Ukraine probably doesn't even have a chance to hold on to Donbas. That's how Russia will have enough resilience to take, in fact, whatever it wants. And it seems to me that Trump was talking exactly about this. But let's look into it further, because there are a few more interesting articles. And first of all, it's that the United States is temporarily suspending some of the sanctions against Russia's oil sector. And most interestingly, according to him, they might not even have to reimpose these sanctions. Why is that? Why wouldn't they reimpose them? Interesting, isn't it? Next, the Politico article. What does the war in Iran mean for Ukraine? Politico dedicated an article to the consequences of the fighting in the Middle East for Kyiv and Moscow. But before we analyze this article right now, I want to remind you that today there was fake information circulating about negotiations supposedly taking place in Istanbul on March 11. Then the office of the president of Ukraine officially stated that no, all negotiations are postponed until later because the war in Iran has started. This means, and it clearly shows, that the United States and Trump have actually lost all interest and concern for Ukraine. And now they have their own war. And what is happening in Ukraine, in fact, does not interest them and probably will not interest them anymore. That is, this whole situation is being shifted entirely onto the Europeans, who themselves are now relying solely on the United States. And this means that the war in Ukraine will simply continue. The Europeans will throw in a couple of euros just to keep this front from collapsing and to prevent the Russians from getting right up to them. But it definitely won't be anything good, nor will it have any good consequences for Ukraine. And on the contrary, this can only lead to even more people leaving, even more people making such decisions, even more people being mobilized, even more categories of those who can be drafted being expanded, and so on. Well, basically, you can think about the consequences yourself. Now let's move on to the Politico article, because it's also a very interesting piece to understand in general the attitudes of both the United States and Europe regarding Ukraine. First of all, it highlights the potential risk of losing American-made weapons, which are extremely necessary to counter Russian air attacks because the United States troops are now using them in combat operations. I won't even remind you that in the first 3 days of fighting, Patriot missiles were used up by countries in the Middle East. It sounds like that, because in Ukraine they kept saying there are no missiles, no missiles, no missiles in Hradli Mondorian, but we constantly saw those missiles there. They were shooting them down, I don't know, someone spit and they shot it down with a Patriot, and that's probably how it looked further on. Even before the airstrikes on Iran began, officials in Washington expressed concern that the conflict could deplete American weapons stockpiles and make the United States more vulnerable. And this argument will likely intensify the longer the war goes on. And we can see that even today, just like before, Defense Minister Hexet stated that the United States wants to deploy 50,000 troops in the Middle East, probably to conduct a ground operation. So we see that basically the entire focus is now directed there, to the Middle East, to Iran. They are fighting with Iran. What is happening in Ukraine no longer interests anyone at all. And at the same time, we see that Europe is also staying silent because Europe is already waiting to buy Russian oil. If the Strait of Hormuz is not unblocked and let's say oil doesn't come from somewhere like Dubai to Europe, then they will buy that oil. In Russia, sending them money, enriching their economy, and in fact continuing to finance this war. And in fact, they will pay for energy resources, they will pay the Russians. They will make weapons. They will give some weapons to Ukrainians so that Ukrainians also have weapons. They will keep fighting, and the European Union will just keep living peacefully. That's how it looks right now. They'll keep handling their problems. Also, the war in the Middle East may affect the peace process to end the war in Ukraine. Trump's attempts to accelerate the achievement of peace are likely postponed indefinitely as the United States has focused its attention on Iran, and in principle these words from the Politico article are fully confirmed by Zelensky, who clearly said that the negotiations about peace in Ukraine have been postponed indefinitely. And this means that there will be no peace, no elections, no rule of law, nothing, don't expect it. From now on, the situation will only get worse. Because there is absolutely no reason right now why the situation should improve in any way. There isn't. If anyone has any reason and can write it, just write it right in the comments. Because people often write to me saying that I'm spreading panic, spreading negativity. Please, at least one positive factor, yes, or in general, at least one factor that should lead to some improvement in Ukraine, at least one positive thing. Why should the situation at the front and in general the situation in the country be better? Because I still don't understand it yet. The Middle East war has also impacted Ukraine's European Union accession. Last week, Ukrainian and European officials were supposed to meet in Cyprus to coordinate further steps, but the meeting was cancelled due to an Iranian drone strike on Cyprus. Let's be honest, if the European Union really wanted to meet with Ukraine, if they really wanted to accept Ukraine into the European Union as soon as possible, they would have done it not in Cyprus, but in Warsaw, Paris, or Berlin. It doesn't matter at all. It's not about the location, it's just about the willingness. Especially since this story about Ukraine joining the European Union in 2028, or was it 2027? That's purely information for the internal Ukrainian audience, which was spread by Zelensky and his team, exclusively to cheer up Ukrainians a bit who don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, but in fact these are just words that aren't backed up by anything at all. And European leaders have already clearly stated that there will be no quick accession of Ukraine to the European Union. Neither Ukraine nor any other country will have any privileges regarding this accession. So there's no need to have any rosy illusions about this either. At the same time, the publication's sources in Brussels note that the European Union plans to reschedule the meeting in order not to lose momentum on Ukraine's accession. I don't believe in Ukraine's accession to the European Union, at least not in the situation Ukraine is in today. First, there's the war. Second, corruption, cronyism. The constitution is on pause, lack of human rights and bussification, people being kidnapped on the streets, which is tolerated by the law enforcement system. What European Union are we talking about? Let's just use our heads and ask ourselves, what European Union, where to next? However, they also write that Russia too is experiencing negative consequences from the fighting. Putin lost a key ally in the person of Ayatollah Khamenei and a number of influential Iranian officials almost immediately after the United States arrested their partner, the Russian dictator, Venezuelan President Maduro, in January. This is very good. In principle, this is very good, but again, it will have absolutely no impact on Ukraine, because if they had attacked Iran in 2022 before Iran started supplying Shaheds to the Russians, taught them and built factories for them and so on, maybe then something would have happened. Now that the Russians are fully autonomous, I don't think anyone is supplying them anymore. Unless they supply weapons to Iran so that they can fight there and further exhaust the United States, Besides, the Russian Federation has lost one of its main arms suppliers. After all, at the beginning of the full-scale invasion in Ukraine, Iran was selling drones and also the technology for their production in Moscow, and they sold the technology. And we know that there are already a lot of factories where Shaheds are being produced on the territory of Russia. So let's be honest, what's happening in Iran right now doesn't really have much of an impact on Ukraine anymore. At the same time, we see that towards Russia, it just keeps growing. This means that, in fact, as we said a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, Ukraine is just a bargaining chip. Now, in this whole big geopolitical game, and it's clear that no one will pay attention to Ukrainians either. So basically, that's the situation we have right now. Write down who says that I'm spreading panic. Please write it down. What positives do you see in this situation, and what real things could actually happen, really? Not aliens coming, no. Putin will be killed or Putin will die. Let's talk about how that's most likely not going to happen. Because even if Putin dies somewhere, maybe he's already dead, they'll just put someone in his place and things will keep going as they need to. And everything will go according to plan. And that's it. There won't be any problems. Write at least one reason why things should get better. It would be very interesting to read it. Thank you all friends. Share, subscribe, comment. See you next time.